What's good, guys? Time for a deal short. Um, I guess this will be more of a breaking news kind of thing. So you guys know I'm a retired air traffic controller, where there is news out of Atlanta that two Delta airline passenger jets have collided on the taxiway in Atlanta. So let's check this out.
Thanks for joining us. We continue to follow breaking news out of Atlanta, where two planes have made contact at one of the world's busiest airports. We want to take you live pictures from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport so you can see one of the damaged planes here. And you can see a slew of police activity and lights as people are on that tarmac investigating. Looks like the filter for this live feed just switched up, so it's a little bit brighter. There we go. Now, the FAA says a Delta Airlines flight 295 was taxiing for departure just after 10 o'clock Eastern this morning when its wingtip struck the tail of another plane, the Endeavor Air Flight 5526. The Delta plane was headed to Tokyo. The Endeavor was headed to Lafayette, Louisiana. So, of course, these are aerial images that we are showing you live. And it looks like right now this is a very wide shot of the scene here of the airport. Now, the helicopter.
So a lot of people look at this and, oh my goodness, they'll go crazy. Like, oh man, this is so serious. It is, but it's not as life threatening as if something in the air happened. Like these we're talking about two aircraft that were on the ground, moving around. That's what taxi means. Um, so right away, it makes you wonder, like, well, who's at fault here? More than likely, it is the air traffic controller who was working the ground surfaces, right? They're called the ground controller. In a place like Atlanta, a busy place like that, sometimes they can have up to two controllers. They'll split up the airport and have a ground controller working one side and another ground controller working the other side. Just to give you guys an idea, some places have more than two. Some places have three ground controllers. It depends on the airport, how busy it is, stuff of that nature. Um, just looking here, it looks like the smaller airplane, which looks like more of a regional jet, was sitting there with the tail knocked off. And it was a larger airplane that came along and hit it. Now, what probably happened here, in my opinion, is a controller who was maybe inexperienced, maybe there was training going on, or maybe there was a controller who was just tired and gave instructions for these airplanes that led to this situation. Um, looking at where that airplane is sitting, they're sitting at the runway, preparing, their last, doing their checks and getting ready to, to depart, waiting for air traffic controllers to give them clearance to take off. So where the airplane is sitting and how the airplane is sitting there is completely normal. There are lines there on the ground that let the pilots know that this is the line that they can't cross. It's called the hold short line. Also on the ground, all the colors and all of the markings on the ground let the pilot know where he's sitting. If you got a close up on it, it'll tell you which runway that you're holding short of. There'll be signs there to give you frequencies on how to get a hold of the air traffic controllers, but the pilots know that. The ground controller would have given them those frequencies as well. And you can see is two taxiways behind them. So as we listen to the rest of this, I believe there was a big airplane, a really big airplane came by and was too close to this regional, the smaller airplane. And I'm talking, I don't want to talk shop. I don't want to get into the woods, and start using air traffic control terms. It's only going to confuse people who are trying to listen. But basically, a really big airplane was taxiing by. And in my opinion, if that's the case, then that really big airplane was on the wrong taxiway. That airplane should have been on the parallel taxiway, the outer taxiway, as opposed to the inner taxiway. So you look at this picture, all these vehicles, you got all the white vehicles will be airport operations vehicles. You got the green vehicles, which would be the what we call crash rescue, or there's the rescue vehicles, right? All these white vehicles and this green fire truck here, that's on the inner taxiway. You see this other taxiway out here, further away from it, that will be considered the outer taxiway. And when you have real big airplanes, uh, Airbus has a really big airplane. Boeing makes a 747 and it's really big. When you have these type airplanes, there are restrictions on as to which taxiways they can use, for a reason. Why do they have these restrictions? Well, somebody might hit something while they're taxiing around. It's happened before, and obviously it'll happen again. Let's get back to the broadcast.
Helicopter pilot is zooming in here, and we can see several fire trucks on scene. And it appears, if you see toward the center of your screen, the tail of that plane appears to be knocked off. This is consistent with some photos that our CBS affiliate in Atlanta has obtained. I want to go now to CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve. Chris, you have been reporting over numerous incidents, near misses. This is certainly not a near miss here. We have two planes making contact.
Yeah, this really amounts to a slow speed collision as these planes were moving about the tarmac at Atlanta Airport, it appears. The Delta Endeavor flight, that's a regional carrier that serves as Delta Connection. So these were essentially two Delta planes, one bound for Lafayette, Louisiana, the other for Tokyo, that made contact. But the A350 is the biggest airplane in Delta's fleet. So it's a bit like a semi truck and a small sedan coming together for a fender bender. The small sedan is going to take it on the chin a lot harder than the big airplane. And in this case, the wing, it appears the wingtip of the A350 essentially severed what we would know as the tail or the stabilizer on the back of the plane. The passengers on board the A350 probably felt a thud. I imagine the folks on the much smaller plane, a CRJ 900, would have felt that far more intensely. We understand.
And as they're talking, you can see on the video, like you see airplanes are still moving. So in this situation, I was looking at the signs and I was looking at the pavement, of course, and this airplane was holding short of runway 8 right, which is 8 right going one direction, and it's runway 26 left going the other direction. So going one direction where they were going, it was 8 right, and going the other way was 26 left. That means there are parallel runways there. So the way it was set up is certain airplanes probably use certain runways depending on where they're going and all that kind of stuff. There's procedures for it. The ground controller needs to know where this airplane is going and then take the airplane to the appropriate runway based on their destination. It really is based on the first fix on their flight plan, how it gets out of the airspace. So that's probably why the airplane was there. Normally, when you have parallel runways, they'll use one runway for arriving airplanes, and they'll use the other airplane runway for departing airplanes. So you see all these Delta airplanes taxiing around and moving around. And I'm kind of looking at this because surely 8 right will be closed at this taxiway. Not 8 right, but the whatever this inner taxiway is, and this tie-in intersection will be closed because we have all this going on. So this inner taxiway can't be used, but you see that they're using the outer taxiways and they're moving airplanes around, and they're probably trying to get them to 8 left. They're probably going to take them out and depart off at 8 left. So when things like this happen, the show must go on. Whatever controller was working, ground control, when this happened, that controller should have been relieved immediately. They get another controller in there. If there were training going on, they would stop the training immediately and they would relieve the controller who was in charge of the training. And then, of course, those controllers would have to go do paperwork, be debriefed, and all this kind of stuff as to what's going on. It just makes for a very long day. But it seems to me that 100% the FAA is involved in this because this took place on the taxiway. The job of air traffic controllers is to prevent collisions in the system. Taxiing around on taxiways is part of the system. So if there was obviously an incident, this is the number one thing to avoid. This is something that, again, we're watching this. They're watching this on TV. The entire world is watching this. The FAA, NTSB, and everyone else is going to be heavily involved in this. The union is going to be involved. It's going to be a thing. And I believe what it's going to boil down to is either A, there was some sort of pilot error in which the pilot did something wrong, did not follow the instructions of the ground controller, or B, and more than likely, the ground controller made a mistake and did not take into consideration the types of airplanes and the portion of the taxiway um, that they gave the instructions for, and the airplanes came together. This happened. I can think of three or four airplanes, three or four airports where this sort of thing has happened involving these really big airplanes. They were called supers as far as the type of airplane, but the wingspan is always the biggest thing with those large aircraft. They have these seriously long wingspans, so I'm pretty sure that is what is going to come out in the wash when the investigation is done. The controllers at Atlanta already know what happened. They already know if it was controller error. They already know if it was a pilot error. And here's the thing with pilot errors as well. When you give a pilot instructions and they accept your instructions, they have to tell you what you just said. It's called a readback. So when you give a restriction to a pilot with his taxing instructions, you want to make sure that he reads that back. Some pilots will just say Roger, which means basically I heard you, but that's on the controller. Like you have to make sure the controller has to make sure the pilot understands the restrictions. So if you're telling an aircraft, especially a certain type of airplane, I want you to take this taxi route, and at this point, I need you to do this, whatever that happens to be. You need that pilot to tell you verbatim what you just said. If you don't, they can get confused, do something wrong, and guess what? The controller is still at fault to some extent. It depends on how they want to do the paperwork at that point. It doesn't seem that anyone was hurt. There's no reports of anyone being injured, at least not yet. So, that's very, very good. But there's definitely going to be investigations behind this, and they probably won't release to the public everything that went wrong for a couple weeks, if not a little longer. But short term, the controllers and the managers up there in Atlanta right now, watching all of the rebacks, let's say rebacks, the playbacks. There's radar for ground movement. They have ground radar, and there's also radar for the airplanes in the sky. So they're going to replay the ground radar. They're going to listen to the tapes, and they're going to listen, and they're going to figure out exactly what happened. They already know. They already know what happened. They've looked at it. They see what it was. They understand what the local rules are. And it's my guess that the local air traffic controller made a mistake, but we'll have to wait for the investigation to see if that's the case or not.
And from Delta, there were 221 passengers on Delta 295 bound for Japan. 56 people were on 5526 bound for Lafayette. No reports of any injuries. Delta says it is going to cooperate with the NTSB and other authorities that will ultimately investigate this. Waiting to hear back from the NTSB about what level of investigation they're going to take. The FAA will certainly look into it.
So, Chris, I don't know if you have return, but from what I'm seeing here in the live pictures is what we're looking at here. This is sort of the Delta carrier. This is the smaller plane whose stabilizer was knocked off. This plane was unable to taxi on its own, unlike the Delta A350 that was able to taxi to the concourse where passengers could deplane. On this plane, passengers were bussed.
Correct.
And there, we should mention no injuries were reported, but go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, no injuries reported. It doesn't sound like, when we say two planes collided, I think people fear the worst, right? Like this was in the air or high speed. It doesn't look like that at all. But just the amount of force when you're moving a giant airplane, even at 10 miles an hour, it's enough to cause a significant amount of damage to something smaller. That's what played out here. Not surprising that they're not going to try to move the smaller plane because we don't know how separated that tail section is from the airplane. You don't want to do additional damage to the runway, to the tarmac, to the airport operations. It will likely need to be towed once they've assessed the damage and sort of finished their investigation.
Okay, and yeah, this vantage point is much easier to see that tail, or as Chris said, the stabilizer there on its side. We're going to continue to monitor these live images.
So Yeah, that seems pretty cut and dry. Their local expert, he knew what he was talking about. Doesn't sound like he was an air traffic controller. Maybe he was a pilot, or maybe he just studies aviation. But his technical terms are on point. He knows what he's talking about. They're going to take their time moving that airplane that was damaged, um, for a bunch of reasons. At the end of the day, all this boils down to insurance. They don't want to cause additional damage. If the airport operator of airport operations gives the okay to try to tow this airplane with that type of damage, then Delta will say, hey, this damage was caused because they towed it. So what they want to do is get as many eyes on as they can. They're going to get all the photos, they're going to get every angle, and they'll be able to submit all that. So, because it's going to come down to money, guys, and it's going to come down to insurance claims. And Delta's not going to want to pay for this. It's 2 Delta aircraft that are involved. So it's 100% Delta on that end, on the user end. So Delta's going to want to go after the air traffic controllers so they can get Uncle Sam to pay. And then in the meantime, the airport operators, which is a separate entity, they're like, look, we don't want to get ourselves in this at all. So we're going to make sure that we don't move this damaged aircraft until every photo has been taken and all the video has been taken and all the experts have looked at it. They want to make sure that they don't do additional damage to this aircraft. Of course, this airplane will never fly again. It's not like we're in a combat situation where we need this plane to fly again. So they're going to figure it out. A lot of times what they'll do is use a crane, either pick the aircraft up or pick up the damaged portion. If it's completely separated from the fuselage, they'll put that on the back of a truck, and then you could probably tow the rest of the Delta regional jet. You just have to figure out what you're going to do with that tail. But there we go. The FAA confirms 2 planes collided at the Atlanta airport. There were 2 Delta aircraft, one really big airplane and one regional jet, which is small for the big airports. Atlanta is one of the busiest airports on the planet. I believe that when this is all said and done and all of the analysis has been done and all the investigations have been completed, that the FAA air traffic controller who was working the ground control position at the time will probably bear the brunt of the responsibility. We'll see how that plays out. Um, just keep in mind, guys, there's an air traffic controller shortage in America. At the big airports, the air traffic controllers are working extremely hard. They're working as hard as they can. They can't be legally worked any harder than what they're doing right now. Most of the controllers that I know that are working at the big airports, they're working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, which is the absolute max that they can work. They can't work any longer hours than that legally, according to our contract and everything like that. So these controllers are stressed. They're being worked past normal tolerances. Air traffic controllers are not designed to be worked like that. They have issues within the air traffic control community. They're trying to get more air traffic controllers through the academy. This is why we're always saying there's an opportunity for you guys. You don't even need experience. The FAA will train you to be an air traffic controller. It's paid training. We talk about it on this platform all the time. It's a great career. Once they get their recruitment numbers under control and they get their levels together as far as how many controllers are supposed to be at these facilities, their staffing numbers, once they get their staffing numbers right, then, all will be well. But until then, we're going to continue to see things like this, unfortunately. And this, luckily this took place on the ground. This was 2 airplanes taxiing. A lot of damage was done, but there was not a lot of opportunity to hurt people. I mean, of course, there was always an opportunity when 2, massive objects come together. People can get hurt, but no one was reportedly injured so far. The worst thing that probably happened here is people, those folks who were on that big airplane trying to go to Japan. Well, they probably won't get out of here for a couple more hours on their way to Japan, so they're going to be late. And then, of course, the people who are going to Louisiana, they probably put them on another airplane already, and they're more than halfway there, if not there already. Because this happened about 4 hours ago, maybe 5 hours ago, as I am filming this episode. So that's it. That's your deal short. We'll keep you guys posted. I'm definitely going to find out what happens with the investigation. I'm really curious to hear the taxi instructions and the readbacks from the pilot to make sure the pilot heard those instructions. I'm really curious to see the ground radar, and also to look into what restrictions may or may not have been in effect for that area. We'll talk about that when it comes out. There's so many things we could talk about with air traffic control. So many things you guys don't know. We could talk about the airport markings and what all those lines mean to the pilot, and us, and what that means to the controllers, and all that stuff. So when that information comes out, we'll definitely do a video on it. Until then, y'all take care. I'm DL Saint. Peace.